Hey, Bomb Squad. If you're a comedian or a podcaster looking for an affordable website solution with a modern look, then we recommend Puck's Hub. With a Puck's Hub website, you can set up your new website in minutes with easy-to-use pre-built templates. Puck's Hub websites are customizable and can easily be integrated with other platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. The best part? Puck's Hub plans are only $5 per month. We use Puck's Hub for our website at the Art of Bombing podcast, and we think you should too. That's why we've partnered with Puck's Hub to offer listeners a free 60-day trial. Head over to puckshub.com to subscribe and use promo code AOBPOD at checkout for your 60-day free trial, and then pay only $5 per month after that. Take your career to the next level with your own Puck's Hub website today.
Dan Bublitz Comedy Productions.
Can you please stop? That's what's coming up on the Art of Bombing episode 283.
My friend Dan, he's got a podcast, 'cause all comics need a podcast, and nobody had a podcast called The Art of Bombing. So Dan went out and bought a tape deck. Who knows why he bought a tape deck? Podcasts don't get played on tape decks, but Dan is from the 80s. So hey there, all you funny jerks, come talk to Dan about your work. Tell him all about your worst times. It's The Art of Bombing.
Welcome to a brand new episode of the Art of Bombing podcast. It is me, your host, Dan Bublitz Jr., and with me, as always, is my co-host, co-producer, and cohort, Mr. Josh Shirley, over in the side over here, acting like a rodeo person.
Clown.
He's like
being a cowboy.
Being a cowboy clown. He's like trying to lasso something. He's always trying to distract me. That's his thing. For those of you listening, you can't see this because we don't release a lot of video. But what he's doing is he's trying to distract me to hopefully make me mess up the intro because I'm on a hot streak. It has been like 10
episodes.
I don't know if it's been that many, but it has been quite a few. At least 5 episodes in a row. I have nailed the intros without messing up, and Josh is on a mission.
Take him down. And I'm telling you, folks, I've tried everything.
Yes. Tried like bodybuilding poses one time.
That's right.
Showing off muscles, and
which is hilarious and should make him laugh a lot and doesn't. I don't know how he's got the composure, folks, to really hang.
Because I'm a goddamn professional.
That's right.
I'm a professional.
It's the consummate professional. And you guys, you don't ever get to hear it. I get to hear it. But man, Dan just goes to a different place when he messes up an intro, and you'll just hear the vocabulary of a sailor, and it is absolutely insane. And you'll be like, whoa, is that the same person that's been hosting this podcast for 6 years? Who is this guy?
This guy that just got distracted because his work phone started ringing.
Oh, you're getting blown up, son.
Getting blown up. It's weird. I have, because I have a regular job now, and I have a big person job, and they gave me like my own computer and a work phone. So now I have 2 phones that I have to keep track of.
Whoa, dude, you are.
Which is a lot. So yeah, being professional in both the podcast and in my life.
That's why you're not messing up, dude. You're stone cold 2-phone Dan.
That's
a big
so much for 2-fan Dan. I'm 2-phone Dan now.
2-phone Dan, folks. Dang, who we got on the show today? 2 phones.
We have a great guest this week. We're talking about being professional and not messing up, and I think that's a good lead into our guest because they are very professional. They are a professional graphic artist. And our guest today is Kira MagCalen, funny comedian based in Denver, Colorado, but has been focusing more on their illustration and their graphic art. And we had a great conversation. We talked about pushing ourselves to get better and how you got to be careful if you're trying to be a preachy, teachy comedian, because it's not easy to be preachy and teachy.
That's right.
I love how that rhymes. Preachy
doesn't
and
go
teachy.
well in your set when you do surprise a room full of comedy expectant folk with your preaching and teaching. It doesn't usually go well, as we'll see.
Come in there and you just start your set with, "All right, class is in session."
Yeah. Have you all found Jesus?
And then you pull down the blackboard. You pull up the projector screen so you can write on the blackboard.
Oh, thanks. That's not good. Oh, the transparency thing? Is that where you're going with that? Like,
no, where you remember in schools they would have the white the projector screens, and they would be they'd be in front of the blackboard, and then when they wanted to use the blackboard, or maybe they had something already ready to go, they would do the reveal.
Write on the blackboard.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I remember
reveal. They used the screen to hide the blackboard.
Yes, I do remember that. That's right.
And then they could do a big reveal.
Because they didn't have computers or slides.
Yeah, or TVs.
Exactly.
Well, they had TVs, but just TVs that didn't work with computers, because computers didn't exist yet.
Wow. Dang, man.
I know. That just goes to show you how old we are. Yeah, I remember when watching a movie at school meant rolling in a big TV on a cart with a VCR.
I hope we end up talking about a blockbuster night when we go into the
wouldn't that be amazing?
It would be. We got to work it in. Let's write that down.
If we could call back this moment in the callbacks episode this week.
I think we should.
Yeah, well, if you're listening, make sure you let us know if you think we pulled off a callback.
That's right. Yeah, it's amazing. We're multi-threaded, Dan.
We are. We're on all levels. We're in the future, we're in the past, and we're right now. And right now, we have a great episode coming up. I just want to let everybody know, if you are listening to this when it comes out, I am going to be in Loveland all weekend for the Loveland Comedy Festival. And if you're in the Loveland or Northern Colorado area, come to the festival. I'm producing it, not so much performing on it, but I'm producing it. So it's going to be a good time. We have 30 comics from all across the country coming to Loveland for the weekend. So yeah, go check that out. laughoutloveland.com. You got any other corporate gigs you can promote? Not really.
It's kind of a select audience there. Yeah, they're happening. Maybe you'll see me when you're at work.
Maybe if you need some sales coaching and you need some training,
it to be hilarious,
and you want somebody that's funny and effective, there you go. Josh is your man.
Folks.
You know where to find him. Josh Shirley Comedy. All right, well then I think we should get into this episode with Kira. What about you? Are you ready, Josh? You ready for this?
Let's go, pro.
All right. Here's our conversation with Kira. Enjoy.
It's the art of bombing.
How often do you go out?
So comedy, I'm taking a little bit of a break from to focus on art a little bit more. Before the break, it would be a few times a month I'd do shows and mics weekly, but yeah.
I guess I didn't realize you were taking a break. I know you're going really hard with the art though. That's awesome. That's got to be an awesome feeling too.
It is. It's been kind of hard to make that transition because you do have to sacrifice a little bit of time, which was an interesting thing, preparing for this particular podcast and thinking about what I've given up both in the good and the bad, and what I'm focusing on now is just a very different perspective.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
And it's different. I mean, at least they're both creative outlets, but it's a different kind of creative outlet.
Yeah, and I'm turning a lot of my old stand-up into a webcomic and stuff, so I'm still writing and flexing that muscle. A little bit less in the performance space at the moment, but
but it's still, I mean, comedy, humor's humor, and
exactly.
In that respect, which is great. And also, I mean, for me anyway, I think that's great because I'm also a big comic book nerd. So I'm like, oh, yeah, you're doing two of the things I like.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of like flexibility in kind of the illustrated medium. Like you can do act outs on stage, but it's fun to add that extra dimension in there of like actually visually representing to somebody just the different characters or like thoughts that you're having. So I've been having a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's something I would like to get in. Well, not illustration because I'm not a good artist, but I want to start writing comics. I've been working on developing a comic. I just have to get it written out and then find an artist to collaborate with on it. But I always think that's cool. Do you know Thomas Nichols?
Yeah, I did a show with him. It was one of the rotating tap shows.
Oh, nice. The only reason I ask is because he's a comic book creator too. He doesn't do art, but he draws, and that's what he sells for merch. And I always think, oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. And so you said that you've been working on your webcomics. So do you put it out on a regular basis?
Yeah,
as far as
every knock on wood, every Monday.
you try to put it out on a regular basis.
Yeah, I try to put it out on Mondays. How I've been pretty consistent so far, but I just feel like the second I'm like, I do it every Monday, it's just gonna not happen. So it's just like, hopefully it's every Monday.
Yeah. And with that, do you put it behind a paywall, or is that you just have it out there where people
Instagram.
can?
Yeah.
Oh, Instagram. Okay,
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, it's way early for plugs because we still got a lot of conversation to get to. But
Totally.
as long as I brought it up, where can people go find your webcomic?
Yeah, so it is Kickeybean, KICKEYBEAN, on Instagram, and also my website is kickeybean.com, and I'll be potentially putting them there. The ones that are a little more like maybe not safe for work or just like include things that I would get in trouble for on Instagram content wise, I think will eventually end up in a graphic novel, but most of it's going to be on Instagram.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, if you do a graphic novel, is it like a continuous story? Because you said you're doing like the illustrations are kind of based on your stand-up. So in a graphic novel format, would it be part of a whole story, or would it be more like an anthology, or like a book, like a Calvin and Hobbes, kind of how they had like comic strips, but they would release big books?
Yeah. The way that it's going, I think it would kind of end up being more of a story because my comedy's pretty personal. It tends to be like related to my life and how that's gone. So what I've been doing with the webcomics has been both like weaving in jokes that I had as well as kind of navigating the experience of like transitioning to webcomics and like I don't know, there is like a little bit of a storyline through it.
Mm-hmm. And how has that transition been for you? And I mean, as far as like what kind of because while you are writing comedy and you're doing humor and you're doing your illustration, there's still kind of a transition between the two, like our different learning curve. Because it's one thing to write a joke to tell on stage, and another one to write it in a physical form and then draw it out.
Oh, for sure. There's a lot of things that are like really difficult. One, you don't get that immediate response that you do with comedy of like laughing. I'll never see that necessarily with the webcomics. That's a little bit something that I miss. And one thing that's like weird that has carried over that I thought was like really appropriate for this too is every time I post a comic, I'm realizing I'm so terrified that the comic is going to bomb and like no one's going to look at it and everyone's going to hate it and I'll have the hatred of the internet on these jokes. It's just like, it's wild to realize the kind of like pressure that's like built into being funny. It's such a silly thing to do and such a silly thing to take so seriously, but I definitely have that.
I think it's hard not to with anything. I mean, especially when you're hypercritical of yourself or even just critical of yourself, it's hard to want to like put out art of any sort without that worrying if it's how it's going to be perceived, if it'll be, whether it be positive or negative. And, at the end of the day, nobody wants their art to be perceived as negative. I mean, there's obviously people that put stuff out that are just oblivious to the truth of their talent or their lack thereof, but
yeah.
But if you have any self-awareness, it's like, you don't want it to go out and have a negative response. How has the response been so far?
It's been pretty good. Like surprisingly good. I'm still like pretty new at it, but it's getting more traction than like just regular art that I was putting out. And because it's a little bit easier, I think, to go back through like web comics. I don't exactly know how to explain how this seems to work, but like instead of like throwing up an Instagram reel of me just like doing comedy, I can put in like this art that people can look back through and kind of gain a new understanding of the storyline as they're looking through it. So and I've also, because I've like taken kind of a break from like the performance side, I have more time to like focus my energy, which is new because I've always done both. So it's been really rewarding to do, I guess, is how that's turning out. But
that's awesome. That's awesome. And and it's in a very interesting way. I mean, because like you said, it's still comedy content, and it ain't any different than if you put that joke out as a reel, except for you're adding another layer to it or a couple layers to it. So it makes it even more intriguing. I mean, and it helps. I come from a marketing background, so to me, I'm like, well, that's also another way for you to stand out, not just as an artist, but as a comedian or comedic voice, because you're doing something different versus what everybody else is. Majority of comics are just putting out reels, and you're like, well, I'm going to take my jokes and I'm going to put out a webcomic.
Yeah, there's a little bit of give and take because you can't do things necessarily like cadence. And you don't necessarily have the flexibility of like doing funny voices or adding that level of like animation, but not in this traditional sense of animation. Like you can activate a lot more space with like the motion of your body when you're doing stand up, and you also have like some crowd energy to like present to people. So there is like some give and take with it for sure, but I've really enjoyed it so far.
And how with that, would do, like you said, you're doing the webcomic and stuff and writing that out. I was curious, have you ever had, because you said sometimes it's kind of hard because you don't have the physical movement or you don't have the delivery. Have you found it hard where you're like, oh, I like this joke, I want to turn this into a webcomic, and then you go to do the illustrating and it's like, oh man, this just ain't gonna probably work?
Yeah.
I guess it's a bomb with the illustration.
Yeah, there's
literally
a lot of
bombing.
There's a lot of times where just the concept of laying out the text of the joke so the punchline is something you get to as opposed to just like read it straight through is weirdly difficult. Because I'm always really conscious of that. Because you can see the whole thing, I'm worried that people like read the punchline first and then like kind of read the joke, and it's just like, well, it's not going to hit the same, so I've got to like pace it out differently in a format that doesn't really lend itself to pacing that way.
I feel like, and I it's hard to keep up with everybody. I've seen your stuff come on, but I feel like it's just more like a one panel graphic with jokes. Is that true, or have you put out multiple panels?
So I do like two different things. One are just like little characters that are like a single panel, and it'll be like just like a little monster, like weird creature and whatever that creature's thinking. And then the ones that are like based specifically on my stand-up are like multi-panel.
Okay.
And they've got like a slightly different style to differentiate them too.
Oh, so you kind of do different styles to even kind of keep your artwork, your different things kind of separate from each other too.
Yeah, I don't know if there's like a logic behind doing that or if that's a good idea.
Just like happy accident.
Just kind of how it worked.
Well, I feel like, again, with marketing, I feel like that's probably not a bad idea. I mean, as an artist or building a brand, I suppose having a certain style of art, but if they're still close to the same style, but just, you're enough to be different so that each product stands out on its own, I think that's probably a good idea, because ultimately that's what we're trying to do, is that's marketing, getting whatever you're trying to sell, whatever service or product or whatever it is you're trying to get to the massive, have it stand out so that it'll get their attention and then, keep it.
Absolutely.
Now, for as far as going forward with all this, you're just kind of getting into the transition of it, and you're doing more art shows and things like that. Where do you hope to see yourself as far as like with the graphic or the comics and stuff? Are you hoping to move it into more of a physical product or application where you're going to be able to, here's, I've got this graphic novel now, I can sell that. And then eventually if you get back into performing, then you have merch for that. Is that something you've been thinking about as well?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the end goal. I've definitely wondered what like returning to stand-up is going to look like at this point. I think I'm going to have a very different approach. I think up until this point I was definitely a real grinder, but not in a way that was conducive to much. There's a lot of people with like the enthusiasm to do it, and I was definitely one of these people where you're motivated, you have the enthusiasm, but you just never really get it. You don't really know what it is. As in my 30s, as opposed to like when I started in my 20s, what I realized I lacked was just like pretty basic business sense.
Well, good news. You're not the only one. I feel like a lot of comedians, that's one thing that they do lack is the business sense. And it's, surprising with comedy how much that does matter, being absolutely able to know even just a little bit.
Yeah. And I'm kind of like gaining that a little bit more with art, and like that's a little bit easier because it's given me some like tangible, like, well, this has to cost this much because it's a physical thing that costs this much to produce, or this much time went into it. Whereas I think in comedy, you get like so excited to be able to go on stage that you're like, of course I'll perform for 10 people in a brewery that's the back room that's got incredibly high ceilings and all the like super tinny equipment. And there's also like a children's ping pong tournament going on for some reason. There's no way that that's going to be a bad time for everyone involved because of comedy.
Comedy makes it all better.
Yeah.
That's what we tell ourselves.
Yeah. I did a show a long time ago in like an arcade bar, and there was this guy who looked like he he'd just gotten divorced or something. Like he was like a level of sad where you're like, something has happened to you recently. And he like clearly like came to this bar because it was in his neighborhood and he wanted to get drunk. And then there were just like a bunch of comics there. And then he like, after like 3 people, and no one's doing great. It's a really weird setup and it's an arcade bar. And like, after a couple people go up and right before I go up, he like lifts his head and is just like, "Can you please stop?"
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was like, on the stage. It's just somebody like at the end of their rope with like a local comedy show.
Just like, I've had enough.
Yeah.
That's
like,
a good, I mean, that's really a good way to describe comedy. As far as like any kind of a bar show of like a hijacked comedy show, that is the best way to describe how an audience feels.
Yeah.
He was the voice of reason for every audience member who's ever been hijacked for a comedy show.
Yeah. I think I actually did okay. Like that actually gave me like an in with people at that point in a weird way, because he was just like so angry, and at least everyone else was like in that weird, like, well, we're going to be polite, even though this is absolutely miserable. So once it just like went off, I kind of like talked to him about having a bad day a little bit and did some crowd work with people, and it like turned out okay. As far as like those types of shows go, but yeah.
Well, and sometimes with shows like that, there's only so much you can do anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't imagine anyone going up there and crushing after just somebody begging them to stop.
And then it's funny too, because I obviously a reaction to that could be, well, if you don't want to hear it, you could just leave.
Exactly. It's not even like there aren't other bars in the area. Also, like, if you're going to sulk, an arcade bar is a really weird choice.
Yeah,
like,
it really is.
Pinball machines going off constantly, and you're just like, this is where I want to sit and mourn whatever it is that just happened.
Maybe he was sad because did they stop the pinball like during the show?
No.
Oh no, okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes they do that kind of stuff, where
Yeah.
it's like, oh, we got to stop all the noise making and then do this comedy show. So
Yeah, that would have been a logical approach, but
no.
Not on that show.
Oh, that's hilarious. Well, that's a good opportunity to transition to bombing. I'd love to hear a story of a time where you felt like you bombed or it was just a bad show and kind of what happened.
Yeah, I thought about this a lot because I've had some doozies.
We all have.
Yeah. I think so. One of the worst shows I ever did, which I would call a bomb on the like intellectual, like emotional level of bombing, but I don't know if I could call it bombing in the like real sense because there was no audience at all. It was just me and the other host of the show, and the other comics like left directly after their set. And like, why we were there, like the host should have just called the show because no one showed up, but he made us perform for these empty chairs.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I was doing like maybe like 20 minutes. It was like one of my first times being allowed to headline, and I was just in this like weird like nightmare of like going through all of my bits and trying to like have like emotional energy and like being like, oh, I'm just practicing or whatever, but inside I'm like, this feels like dog shit. This is the worst.
Did you get paid for the gig at least?
Yes.
Okay, because also I feel like, as a producer, like that's a bad move to me. Like, and a good example. Just today, I postponed a show. I had low ticket sales. It's July. A lot of the shows we produce, kind of the numbers haven't been what they usually are. But it's also summertime. You're competing with that. But I had a show tonight that I postponed because I didn't have any pre-sales, and I didn't want to, risk people coming to the door because they may not, and then have these comics come up and to perform for nobody or just a couple people. So that whole idea to me of, making comics perform for no audience is just mind-boggling.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't follow any like real logic.
No, I mean nobody wants to cancel or postpone a show, but sometimes that's just you just have to. It's just that's the business.
Yeah, sometimes you don't get a room full of people, and that is kind of one of the two ingredients to a comedy show.
Yeah, right. People in a room. Yeah, that's very important.
So that, I think, was probably the worst show I've ever done, because that was probably like one of those like, man, I don't know if I can do this ever again. Like, I was like, I always try to have this philosophy of like, how do I make this fun for me? So even if I'm not doing great, like at least I can like play around and do something. But in that situation, it was just like nothing. Like even like the host was just like on his phone. I was just like, why am I doing this? It was so weird.
It was like, probably felt like a bad audition or something.
Yeah, very much. And then the other one that I was thinking about was a really weird show I did. I don't remember where in the Midwest. I did like a run through the Midwest, and I had never performed in the Midwest before. I was pretty much just like local to Denver, and I'd done some like stuff in California, but pretty liberal rooms. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't say that I'm like a particularly political comic, but there's definitely things that I just like didn't realize might be like not okay to say on stage at that point. And I ended, it was like a pretty rough set of just like people staring at me, and just like Midwestern politeness though, of just being like blank, but they're like, we're gonna listen to her because she clearly put some time into this, but like at the same time, just like seething, quietly seething, and I ended it thinking it would be like a funny joke of being like, oh, if anyone has mushrooms, I'm looking for them, because I wasn't serious about it. I just like thought it would be a funny way to end it because I'd like established that I did all these things and that I was from Denver and all this. And then there was like an audible gasp. And I was like, oh, like I might as well have just been like, if anyone's got heroin needles, I'm a dartboard. You can just throw them right at me.
Come get me.
Yeah, they were so not on board. And I've never, like, you'd think being booed is bad, but I think being like gasped, like someone's like, oh, you're going to hell, like so much worse.
Oh, absolutely. And it really, especially depending on who the person was that made the gasp, you know, if it's like a sweet older lady, it makes you feel like your grandma's disappointed in you or something.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it was too. I think it was like an older couple, and it was like, man, I bet they just like planned this as like a night out for themselves, and they thought it was going to be fun, and they'd do all this laughing, and instead they just had me like saying all this stuff they didn't want to hear, and then just like ended it like sin.
That does happen a lot, though. I feel like with, you know, when you get used to performing in like a certain area. That's why I always try to encourage people, even if you're not like at that level where you can tour or, you know, like feature, headline or whatever, just go to other scenes and check out some open mics and stuff, because it's a good parameter of where your material is, because it's
absolutely
easy to like get good in one scene and think you're, you know, get to the top of that food chain, I guess, and then go to another place and then just eat total crap because
yeah
you're not relatable.
I actually like, I really appreciate, not that night, I just felt bad about myself, but like generally I think I really appreciated going through, because it also becomes like the challenge of like, so what is the common ground? What are the things that we all find funny? And it does make you a lot better. And I think it also just kind of makes you a more well-rounded person. You get a lot more perspective on just how the rest of the country is running, and a lot of like prejudices and ideas you have about people kind of dissolve once you go into other places.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
And I've seen it firsthand, you know, going around. Yeah, you do get these, it's easy to get like ideas of how people are going to be and act, and then once you get there, it's not what you think at all.
Yeah,
and you get pleasantly surprised. Sometimes it's exactly what you think it's going to be, and that's very disappointing.
yeah. Sometimes you can judge a book by its cover, for sure, but a lot of time, I would say more often than not, I think you realize some like positive things about people. At least when I was traveling, I had more just kind of like learning the better parts of human nature. And especially when you're on the road, you're so dependent on people helping you out like a little in just like weird little ways, because like you don't know a town. So like knowing where to go for certain things, and like figuring out what to do, or like weird little tricks of living on the road, like if you have to like park somewhere overnight, good places to stash your car, things like that. And I found like more or less people were like pretty accommodating, which was really nice to
people see. Like to be helpful, and especially when they can recommend what they think is cool in their towns, you know, in their communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And those things usually are pretty cool in like a way that you wouldn't have necessarily put together yourself too, if you hadn't like been there. If you're just like flipping through the internet looking for ideas, it's really nice to have that personal attachment.
It is to have those recommendations. I always find that fun. That's one thing I try to do. I'm trying to do more of when I'm on the road, but sometimes you just don't have time. But it's so fun to go, like when you're in some of these smaller towns or different areas, to go do some of the sightseeing. Even, you know, like going to like the cheesy, you know, string museum or whatever. It insert cheesy whatever museum.
Like the cheesy string museum, not the string cheese museum.
Yeah, it's
Yeah. That's
cheesy
totally
string.
different state. Yeah.
Although I'm not gonna lie, a string cheese museum sounds pretty amazing.
I feel like they'd have to switch out their exhibits pretty often, or maybe not. That stuff does keep for a while. But
Yeah, it's so processed.
yeah, like it's food.
Yeah,
Like I
yeah,
don't know if it knows about mold.
yeah, exactly. It's amazing how long some of that stuff could keep. But that would definitely, that's one of the things I definitely like to try to do is go to some of those like sites and stuff when I'm on the road. And then it's even cooler, like you said, when somebody recommends a spot and then you go check it out. And it is just as cool as they said.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're
Yeah.
just like, sometimes it's just nice to be in air conditioning, and that's a weird bar to set for an attraction. But you're just like, well, I'm inside, and it's 100 degrees out, so
Feels nice.
yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Now with those two stories, I mean, it seemed like it was kind of, I mean, well, the one story is definitely out of your control. I mean, there was no audience. That's wild. But
Yeah.
and it seems like you kind of figured out that a lot of it just had to do with, kind of your material where it was, and not necessarily having the experiences performing in front of other audiences. But when you have shows like that, like what do you try to pick apart to learn from to get better?
Like I said, that one in particular, I think I just was like licking my wounds and just feeling like a terrible person. But once I kind of like went through the Midwest a little bit more, I started just like experimenting with a lot of more of like the performance aspects. Like I'm very like joke driven, writing driven, and so my style can be like very subdued a lot of the time. And so something that I think I started implementing, like going through the Midwest and especially the South, and then like coming back, and it works at pretty much everywhere. It's just like giving audiences energy from your set, learning how to like say things in different ways, and not relying just on like, oh, this is a clever idea, like other weird little things. Sometimes just like the way that you say a phrase, even if it's not a particularly funny phrase, is enough to be a great joke. And that was something that I think I learned, like other ways to be funny. That sounds like such terrible advice. Is like, so after your bomb, what did you did you find other ways to be funny after you just like couldn't do it in this one room? But yeah, it sounds like really simple advice, but it's actually very difficult to do. It's like finding a different way to make something funny than the way you originally intended it to be.
Well, and sometimes it's hard to do that just because you have a particular style or voice too, like
Right.
a joke, you could definitely change it and change the delivery or the cadence of the joke, but it doesn't match your personality. So it's like, then you feel like you're a phony, you're not living up to your own character or personality.
Yeah. And I think that's just kind of the learning curve of it. You sort of find what is natural for you to do, and like some parts of that does involve not being comfortable with yourself on stage, I guess. I think that's a really important boundary to push if you want to do like performance and comedy, is just like figure yourself out. And it might be more of something, it might be less of something, but you'll kind of figure it out by trying it.
Well, yeah, I definitely think, with comedy, you have to be somewhat experimental, and it's easy to get like locked in where, you build a set and it's really good, and then you just ride that set, because it doesn't fail. But it's like, creatively, push some boundaries,
Yeah.
yourself, not necessarily. When I say that, I'm not saying go out and be a crude comic or whatever. I mean pushing your own boundaries to try different things.
Right, exactly. Like I always when people talk about pushing boundaries, the one thing that I always like to remember is like chances are the person that came to the comedy show has probably had a long day and this was a fun thing they were looking forward to, and they don't, typically speaking, want you to like push the boundaries and like tell it like it is and all that. Like they just want something fun.
Fun and lighthearted. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
They want
like
to come enjoy themselves.
exactly. Like what that means varies from place to place and person to person, but like I have like a huge pet peeve of like comics who I think maybe they wanted to go into teaching and just didn't go that route because they can't because they're comedians. But they just like they're trying to prove a point to their audiences, and I really just don't think you need to do that.
Yeah.
I think pushing boundaries for yourself is very different than like, and you can play with audiences and kind of like push boundaries in some sense, but at the end of the day, the thing you need to remember is like they came here to have fun, and that is your job.
Absolutely. And I feel like that does get lost on a lot of people sometimes. I feel like as comedians, we're all a little bit, different levels of being narcissists, some more than others, obviously. But it's easy to forget that you're there to perform for the audience. And, you don't have to give up like your artistic creativity or your integrity all the way, but you have to have, it's just like a relationship. You're building a relationship with the audience, and if you're in a relationship with another person, you have to there's give and take, so you have to make some sacrifice, or that relationship ultimately doesn't work. It's the same thing with comedy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's just like good people skills 101, which is maybe not the strong point in the comedy scene.
I was going to say, we could probably talk about that for hours about the lack of people skills in comedy. Yeah. Myself included. I'll throw myself in there. Sometimes my people skills aren't very good. I'm very awkward sometimes and don't know how to act.
I just like to stand next to people silently, and then I'm like, this is going well. I'm very bad at it.
I'm sorry. The reason I'm laughing is because I'm like, man, you just described what I do a lot. I'm just there. I'll like be hanging out with another comic or a couple, whatever, and they'll be having this conversation, and I'm just standing there, and I'm just like, I'm here.
Yeah. Just like nod a little bit. Like,
I
love like sidling up to like a circle of people like smoking or drinking, and you're just kind of like getting in, just be like, yeah, I'm, and me too. Like,
I'm part of this too. I'm in the community.
I'm in this circle. You just gotta stand like slightly sideways so you fit in, because everyone's already like engaged in something, but you're like, I'm participating.
Oh yeah, I've definitely been there. But then I have the realization, because I look the way I do, I'm like, oh man, I probably look really, really creepy right now. I'm just like awkwardly standing there. I'm just like, oh, I gotta go sit down somewhere. I need to exit this scenario.
And I think what would be like the funny part that I just for some reason can never remember is like the way to enter a conversation is just to be like, hi. Like,
yeah, right. Yeah, just
it's super easy. It's such a short word, and I just
so easy to
myself to say it.
Yeah, you can just go in and say hi. Yep, or introduce yourself. Yep.
Yeah, just like if it's people I know, I won't say anything either. I'll just be like, they know who I am. It's just like I could just be like, "What's up?" and then be part of the circle like a normal person. But I just never have that level of brain function in a social setting.
Yep, I'm the same. I was on the road with another comic last weekend, and it was interesting to watch them because we would go have like lunch or a drink or whatever it was, and they were very personable and all about like introducing themselves, and I was just like, oh man, how do they do it? Like, I'm just like,
did you ask?
No, I didn't. I should have. I should have been like, where do you have the confidence to where you just introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, I guess at some point you just develop like a thick skin to it, or maybe some people just enjoy it.
Yeah, and that, that's probably probably it. They just, enjoy meeting people and having conversations with different people.
Yeah.
I'm the opposite. Like, I do comedy, but I'll the first one to say that I don't necessarily like being around groups of people unless they're like a close knit group of people. Hanging out with my friends in like a bar, that's fine. But if I'm like hanging out in a bar with strangers, I'm just like, ha.
Yeah, it's a lot of variables. I don't know.
That's for sure.
Yeah, it's just like a lot of like people math you have to do if you're talking to strangers and like trying to like figure out where everything fits in. Not my strong suit.
Well, me either. Well, we're gonna keep going with this. I want to know, and this, you got to have some kind of a writing process. So this is going to be a perfect question for you. What is your writing process like? And especially now that you're doing more of taking your material and turning it into comics and stuff. What's that process like? How do you decide, oh, this is a joke I want to illustrate and turn into a comic?
Yeah. So for writing jokes, when I was thinking, there's just my cat's butt, don't mind that. For writing jokes that were like for the stage, I used to, like I said, I was like very much in that like grind mindset. So I was just like, I'm gonna write 10 one-liners every day. I'll probably only keep 1 or 2 of them, which to be honest is generous because a lot of them weren't that good. It's like you could keep 1 or 2 a week at that rate. But so I would like try to write like the format of a joke every day, and then I would try and write out stories and stuff. But honestly, where a lot of my material came from was either just like conversationally with people or through like just weird life events that happened. That was more what felt like my voice to tell. And then what has kind of carried over into the illustration side of that has been really fun to explore, because that has been a little bit more on the like conceptual side of just like weird thoughts that I had, because it's easier to put that like visual in front of people in a way that was like, if you're making a reference in a stand-up set, you have to hope that your audience is like the right demographic to get the reference and that they think it's going to be funny. And that's not necessarily always true. And it's always like a sliding scale of who you're talking to at any given show.
Yo, absolutely.
Yeah.
I know that all too well, being the nerd that I am, and some of my material being pretty nerdy.
Yeah, sometimes you go out there and you're like, what did I do? I have a joke that references Richard Scarry's Busy Town, like the children's book. And I did that show in front of like a group of like younger, like 20 somethings, and they had no idea what I was talking about. Like, cool. That was just like a pretty integral part of like my childhood and a lot of my like generation's childhood, but glad to know I'm older than you. Like, be figuring that out on stage in real time.
Yeah, well, just be thankful you're not my age, because I'm at that age where I'll make references to like Nintendo and I have to have a narrow demographic, because it's like older people don't know what I'm talking about and younger people don't know what I'm talking about.
I guess it's not really a thing anymore.
Well, I mean, I guess Nintendo Switch is. I mean, Nintendo's still around, but like I make a reference to
the like old school, like Nintendo 64 and Super Nintendo and stuff like that.
Yeah, and even like the classic.
Yeah, classic Nintendo. Yeah,
even older than that.
We're talking Duck Hunt here.
Yeah, exactly. I'm talking about Duck Hunt.
Yeah. Good thing we made that reference on this podcast, and now a bunch of people are Googling, what is Duck Hunt?
You're probably not wrong.
That never worked. I don't know. Maybe somebody out there had a working Duck Hunt controller, but I never got them to work.
Yeah, they always seemed like they were off just a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's a technology that I don't know if how well they've refined it over the years. I mean, because I still like to play games like that. Not like one of my favorite games is Big Buck Hunter.
Oh yeah,
just because it's just a fun shooting game. And even those games, a lot of times the guns don't work very well at all, and they're Connect.
yeah, it's not Bluetooth or anything. They have
Yeah,
like a
it's like
solid link.
it's like you have a link, and it still doesn't work.
Yeah, I always just chalk that up to arcades just having stuff that's been banged around and broken. But I guess now that I think of it, like I think they just don't work very well.
Yeah, that technology just hasn't been improved.
Yeah.
Since it came out,
and they just haven't figured it out yet.
They're like, well, if the graphics are good, they won't care if the technology works or not.
Yeah. You've almost got to do the Space Invader thing where you're shooting sort of generally where you think it's supposed to go and not where you're aiming. It's a little bit of like an art more than a science.
It is, yeah. Well, and there's a little bit of science in because you got to see, like, watch where at least some of the shooting games you can see where the hit is, even if you miss. Like you'll see where it hits the screen,
right?
And you're like, oh, okay, so it's off by this many, so many degrees or this angle. So if I move the gun down here, it'll hit over there.
Yeah.
You got to do some geometry.
I always love that. That's how I was taught that in school. They're just like, so you didn't need to triangulate in order to play a video game.
Yeah, I would have paid closer attention. Let me tell you,
I think
that would have been
a lot better.
Yeah, definitely would have captivated me.
Yeah.
Oh, that's for sure. All right, well, we're gonna start wrapping up. I always like to go out more positive towards the end. So we talk about bombing, which is, the purpose of this. So what's been one of your favorite and or one of your best gigs? Doesn't have to be, again, it doesn't have to be like the best gig you ever did, just a gig that was near and dear to you for whatever reason.
Yeah, I actually have like a really special one for this that's like kind of a weird one. And it was, so when I started comedy, I was in this relationship with somebody for like 8.5 years. And then our relationship ended and I just lost my mind. And I like had this like huge breakdown and I decided like to go off the grid and live in the woods. Like that's how devastated I was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I give up everything. And I was running a show at this point in time, which is important. But I just like dropped everything. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. So like a lot of people were super worried about me and I didn't know because I was like no contact with anybody. And I was like going up into the mountains kind of where my brothers live in southern Colorado. But at that point in time, there was a forest fire in that mountain range. So I couldn't like access the woods that I had like planned to go live in. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll just go back to having a life. Like that was enough to just abandon that plan. So I came all the way back to Denver and I came back on the night of the show that I was running, which again, didn't tell anybody I was leaving. Nobody knew where I was. All of the comics showed up. All of the audience showed up. And a friend of mine decided to like guest host it for me until they could figure out what was going on. Or maybe I texted, I don't know. But like basically the show was all set up. The only person who didn't come was the feature that night. And then I showed up like as the show's starting, like just still with sticks in my hair and like completely out of my mind. And the person who was hosting was just like, so everyone just kind of rolled with it. We're all here. The only one who didn't show up is the feature. Do you want to do the 15? And I did. I went up and I like started talking about like, so I was going to go abandon society, but it's on fire out there. So I can't. And just kind of like had this like really cathartic mental breakdown on stage about what happened. And honest to God, it's probably one of the best sets I've ever done. I don't remember a thing that I said.
I was just going to ask, did you record that? Because like,
Oh, I wish I had.
because I feel like that's you could definitely get some good material out of that. Because the whole concept of wanting to run off from society and go into the woods, and then the woods being on fire, which is also a really good metaphor for life too,
Yeah.
sometimes.
It could not have been. It was like such a like seeing yourself as like the cartoon character. It's just, like being like, you might not be the main character, you might just be like a weird cartoon plot going on in the background. I didn't record that set, so it's just like this memory that I have, but that is for sure one of the best sets that I had, and part of it was just like being so open and raw, but not like dark. That was the other thing too, was I wasn't up there just being like, I'm really sad that this happened or whatever. I was just like honest about like the weird little things that happen when you're trying to go through a breakup, and then also the very surreal things that happen when you try to go to the woods and they're on fire.
That's well, and I feel like with that, it's because you're being true. I was listening to Mark Maron's podcast today. He had Sarah Tiana on there, or Tiara on there, and she talked about how, like, when she first started doing comedy, she thought she needed, as a female comic, to really stand out, to be a kind of a dirty comic, or make it seem like she was more promiscuous than she was. And then she, finally had the realization that, she didn't feel right about it because it wasn't who she was as a person. And then she started being more honest on stage. And then that's when she felt like she was connecting. And she made a really good point. She said, it's funny how you're trying to connect with the audience, but you don't realize honesty is what the best way to connect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it takes a degree of being honest with yourself that is really challenging sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. And, and willing to be honest with yourself and open up with, what I mean?
Yeah.
Like to actually be vulnerable. There we go. That's the word. Being honest with yourself,
absolutely.
and then not being afraid to be a little bit vulnerable. And audiences appreciate that. They really do. I mean, that's how a lot of my comedy now has been more based on, and I always have kind of based it on my life or whatever, but I feel like it builds a better connection when you're honest and talk about, things in an honest way. People are going to appreciate that.
Yeah. Things that, I think I'm just going to repeat what you just said. I was just like, yeah.
That's all right. Yeah.
Like, that's what
they can connect.
Yeah. We have connected over that phrase.
Well, this is awesome. The last question that I always ask the guest is an important question. We have the art of bombing. Get plump. Oh, I can't even say it. Or we're going to rewind. All right. We have the art of bombing. Get pumped playlist out on Spotify. Doesn't have to be a song that gets you pumped to do comedy, but just a song that gets you pumped up for whatever. What's a song you'd add to the playlist?
It's a Primal Scream song, and I'm like blanking on the name. I think it's "Moving On Up" by Primal Scream.
Primal Scream, "Moving On Up." Perfect. Well, this has been fantastic. I know we already did your plugs earlier, but go ahead and do the plugs on the appropriate time as well, which is right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can catch like webcomics and stuff on Instagram at KickyBean. That's KickeyBean. I also have a website, kickybean.com. And then if I do, or when I do go back to being on stage, my tour dates and stuff will be on that site. So
perfect. And you do take commissions.
I do. Yes, I do.
Yeah. So if you want some awesome artwork done, get a hold of it.
Yeah,
all right.
Absolutely.
This has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
This has been a Dan Bublitz comedy production.